Hi, this is Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about theater of the mind versus miniatures and terrain. So I've already established in this series that you should be running 33% to 45% of your combat encounters in theater of the mind. And that means that 55 to 66% of your combat encounters are going to be using miniatures. So how many miniatures can you put on the table? All right, there's a strict limit, and we're going to get into it. I'm going to tell you the right way and the wrong way to Dungeons and Dragons when it comes to miniatures and terrains. Every time I say this is right or this is wrong, you can attach the words "in my humble opinion" to it, because that's what it is. It's my humble opinion, no more and certainly no less. All right, so let's get rolling. So basically, you as a dungeon master have a hard limit on what you can put on the table, and that is $300 USD in actual miniatures, and then $150 in representative miniatures. If you don't know what representative miniatures are, check the last video in this series, and it'll explain exactly what representative miniatures are. All right, so basically, why are you limited to $450 of miniatures and representative miniatures at your table? Well, there's multiple reasons why, and I'll explain it. Okay, so first of all, your table is your table. Okay, and today. Oh, and by the way, not only are you capped at $300 for miniatures, $150 for representative miniatures, a total of $450 on the table. You are also capped at 50 pieces, 50 miniatures and terrain, 50 pieces on the physical table. No more than that, right? That includes trees, that includes temples, that includes dragons, that includes goblins. No more than 50 pieces should touch your table, okay? And why am I saying 50? Well, first of all, you're going to have a hard time putting more than 50 on there if you're capped at $450. If you're going to have any quality in your minis, right? And you should have some quality in your minis. Your miniatures should look really nice, right? Or as best as they can, right? There should be quality tags on them, right? Like not just junk you bought at a toy store, right? Like, actually, sometimes you are going to get material at a toy store, but it should be quality stuff from the toy store, right? So, and basically, so the cap is $300 on minis, $150 on representative minis, and no more than 50 pieces. Now, why do these limits exist? So, first of all, miniatures are outrageously dangerous for dungeon masters, okay? So, first of all, I've already shared this before. I'll say it real quick. I know a dude literally almost lost his marriage over miniatures, right? He had thousands of miniatures in dozens of tubs all over his house. Every week when he would get ready for his, he would get some skeletons, right? But he didn't need a skeleton. He needed 50 skeletons. And then he needed 50 skeletons, not with swords, but 50 skeletons with spears, right? And, and then he started getting these Kickstarter deals. And, like, these Kickstarter deals were insane. Like, you'd get hundreds of miniatures for buy-ins on these, and it scaled very quickly. And his wife was really frustrated because there was literally no room in the house for this out-of-control aspect of the hobby, right? And this was just, and this wasn't even, and one of the biggest things was he spent all this time going through all the crap he owned to get the right miniatures every week. So it was a serious problem. So the reality is, if you're you need to have limitations on what you're doing each week at the table, okay? And we're not even discussing collection yet, right? We're just talking what you can bring to the table. So, but it's a very real, like, you need to put limits on miniatures, because they will cut you in 5 different ways, right? Okay, so one, you can just own too many miniatures. That is a problem. And I'll keep that for another video, because I want to deal with collections separate, right? But 2, the other issue is time, right? If you have more than 50 pieces of terrain and miniature on your table, what time did you put into the story? What time did you put into thinking about the player characters? What time did you put into thinking about your own mental state, your own preparation for the game? And I can tell you the answer: jack all of nothing, right? And the reality is, and I struggle with this, right? Because I spend a lot of time getting miniatures prepped And increasingly, I'm using Magic the Gathering cards in my game. I have thousands of cards, right? And I have to watch myself because it's very enjoyable to. And my player characters in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition now have player decks, which include Magic the Gathering cards that are specific to Dungeons & Dragons, right? And I have to be careful not to spend too much time fiddling around with my Magic the Gathering card collection and making sure I'm spreading my time well across everything. And miniatures was doing this way before we had to think about Magic cards, right? It's a time sink where you can think you're creating a good game, but you're really just like fiddling around with your toys, right? Like, so there needs to be a hard limit, right? No more than 50 pieces on your table. And most games you won't even need 10 or you'll need 10 or 20 max, right? And no more than $300 of miniatures and $150 of representative miniatures. And these are hard, real limits that are going to keep you focused on what's important in the game. Miniatures are super fun, right? But they can be too fun, and they can definitely be way too much of a time sink, and they can be too much of a money sink, right? And in addition to that, we have to be careful too, because some players are going to be very responsive to a miniature. You put that miniature down, and they're going to like, oh, hey, there's a skeleton. I can see its dusty bones, and I can see it's got a rusty sword, right? But and then you don't, as a dungeon master, a lot of times you don't need to say more than that. The miniature's there, right? But sometimes some players do not. I've already gotten this in the comments. Some people really respond to the narrative description more, and so you can be drawn into. Miniatures are huge pitfalls for dungeon masters. We should absolutely, they're like a chainsaw, right? We should absolutely, chainsaw will cut a tree down. It's a useful tool, right? It'll also cut your hand off if you don't know how to use it and if you're not careful with it, right? That's the issue. Miniatures are chainsaws. They're powerful, they have a very distinct purpose, and they can complete that purpose. But if you're not careful with them and you are not watching for their danger, they will cut, miniatures will cut your hand off, right? Like so miniatures are great, but they're also powerful and dangerous, right? So just be aware of that. So you as a dungeon master have a hard limit, right? If you have more than $300 worth of miniatures, and if you have more than $150 worth of miniatures on the table, right? You're playing Dungeons & Dragons wrong, in my humble opinion. And you need to get it set and get it right, as it currently stands. That, to me, is the limitations for, now that we are, exploring this theater of the mind and miniatures and terrain, I'm putting hard numbers on this. Are my numbers right? Are my numbers wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.